When my son told me he had finally found the woman he wanted to marry, I smiled, not because I was overjoyed, but because I was scared. Scared that someone new would enter our small, quiet circle and change it forever. You see, for years, it had just been me and Daniel. After his father passed away, the house grew quieter than I could bear. Daniel's laughter was the only sound that gave the walls life again. He was my world, my only child, my only reason to wake up in the morning, to cook, to pray, to keep going. So when he said the words, "Mom, I've met someone special," my heart fluttered, part pride, part fear. I told myself, he's growing up, and that's what mothers dream of. But deep down, there was a small ache, the kind of ache that comes when love starts to shift, even slightly, away from you. For weeks, I prepared for her visit. Her name was Lena. Daniel had mentioned her so many times. How kind she was, how intelligent, how she laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. He said she was the first person who made him feel seen. I was happy for him. At least that's what I kept telling myself. That Saturday, I ironed the curtains, polished the silverware, and cooked Daniel's favorite stew, the kind his father used to love. I wanted everything to feel like home, because that's what I was afraid of losing. When Lena finally walked in, I saw her smile before I even heard her voice. Pretty, graceful, polite. She brought me flowers and said, "Mrs. Andrews, Daniel has told me so much about you." But there was something in her tone, just a touch of something I couldn't name. Not arrogance, not cruelty, just distance. We all sat together. I tried to listen, to be part of the laughter, but I could feel myself fading into the background of my own home. The way Daniel looked at her, I hadn't seen that light in his eyes since he was a little boy showing me his first school project. And for the first time in years, I realized he didn't belong only to me anymore. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to the kitchen. I told them I was checking the dessert, but I didn't go back right away. I stood behind the half-open door, just listening. And that's when I heard something that made my hands tremble. Something I wasn't supposed to hear. Something that changed how I saw everything. My son, his fiancée, and even myself. Before Lena ever came into our lives, it was just Daniel and me, for a long, quiet time. Our house was small, but it had everything we needed. A tiny porch with peeling white paint, a kitchen that always smelled of coffee and cinnamon, and a living room filled with the laughter of one little boy who used to believe his mother could fix anything. Daniel was my miracle. I remember the day he was born, rain tapping on the hospital window, his tiny hands curling around my finger. He looked at me as if he already knew we were going to have to face this world together. When his father, Mark, passed away in an accident, Daniel was only 6. I remember the morning the police knocked on our door. I remember the silence afterward. How heavy it was, like the whole house had stopped breathing. People said time would heal me, but it was Daniel who did. He would sit beside me, his small hand resting on mine, and whisper, "It's okay, Mommy. I'll take care of you when I grow up." And he did. He took care of me in ways no child should have to. When I cried, he'd bring me tissues. When I worked late, he'd leave little notes on the fridge. "Don't forget to eat." We didn't have much money, but we had each other, and in that tiny world, we were safe. As Daniel grew older, he became everything a mother could hope for. Kind, hardworking, gentle. He loved fixing things, always had his sleeves rolled up, helping the neighbors, repairing broken radios, or shoveling driveways in the winter. Sometimes I'd look out the window and see him helping Mrs. Carter carry groceries, and I'd feel proud. Not just because he was good, but because I knew Mark would have been proud too. But there were moments, small, quiet ones, when I'd realize how much of his childhood had been spent comforting me. I'd see the worry in his eyes when I was tired. I'd catch him checking if I'd eaten. He had grown into a caretaker far too early, and though I'd cherished him for it, I often wondered if I had made him feel responsible for my happiness. When Daniel went to college, the house became too quiet again. I would still cook 2 servings out of habit. I'd still set the table for 2. Sometimes I'd even speak out loud as if he were still there, telling him about my day, asking about his. The silence that followed those conversations was the hardest part. He called often, always the same cheerful voice, always asking if I was doing okay. I would say, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't you worry about me." But mothers lie about that sometimes. We say we're fine when our hearts ache just to hear the sound of our children walking through the door. Then, one day, his voice sounded different on the phone. Lighter, happier. He said, "Mom, I met someone." I remember sitting there, holding the phone, smiling even though he couldn't see me. He told me about her. Her name was Lena. He met her at work. She was new in the department, confident, organized, always smiling. He said she brought him coffee on his first day back from a rough week, and that somehow, after that, he couldn't stop thinking about her. I listened quietly as he spoke about her, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, how she listened to him talk about his father, how she said she admired people who stayed loyal to their family. That last part made me smile, because that was Daniel, loyal to a fault. He said, "Mom, I think she's the one." I didn't know what to say. There's no handbook for the moment your child's love begins to belong to someone else. So I said, "If she makes you happy, then she's already family." And I meant it. Or at least I wanted to mean it. A few months later, he told me he wanted to bring her home for dinner. "Just a simple evening," he said. "I want her to meet you, Mom. She's nervous about it." That made me laugh. Nervous? To meet me? I thought maybe she was shy, or maybe she'd heard that mothers can be difficult. But I promised him I'd be kind. I told him I'd make my special beef stew, the one he used to ask for every birthday. In the days before they came, I found myself cleaning like never before, polishing the silver that no one ever used, ironing the tablecloth I'd been saving for special occasions, and even dusting the old photo frames. Each picture told a story. Daniel as a baby, his first bike ride, his graduation cap. Every memory stared back at me, as if asking, "Are you ready to share him now?" I wanted everything perfect, but deep down, I knew this dinner wasn't just about food or introductions. It was a test. A quiet test of whether I could let go. When the evening came, I saw the two of them walking up the path from the window. Daniel was holding a bouquet of yellow tulips. That was Lena's idea, I could tell. Daniel never remembered flowers. When I opened the door, she smiled politely, her lipstick perfectly done, her eyes taking in every corner of my old house. She handed me the flowers and said, "It's such a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Andrews." Her voice was warm but careful, like she was performing politeness rather than feeling it. And yet, I couldn't judge her too quickly. I knew how nerve-wracking it could be to meet someone's mother for the first time. As we sat together, I studied her quietly. She was beautiful, in that polished, effortless way young women often are. But beneath that perfection, I sensed something else. A distance, maybe even discomfort. She laughed at Daniel's jokes, but her eyes kept wandering around the room, pausing at every old photo, every worn-out piece of furniture. It was as if she was silently measuring the life I had built and finding it lacking. Still, I told myself not to assume. Maybe she was just nervous. Maybe I was overthinking. So I smiled and said, "Make yourself at home, dear." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Dinner started out pleasantly enough. Daniel told stories from work, and Lena chimed in now and then, always polite, always poised. But something about the way she talked, so certain, so self-assured, made me feel small in my own home. Not because she was rude, but because she seemed to belong to a world I had never known. A world where words like simple and old-fashioned meant less than. When Daniel got up to get more wine, Lena leaned back slightly and looked around again. Her gaze paused on my old curtains, the ones I had sewn myself years ago. She smiled faintly and said, almost under her breath, "It's cozy." That one word, cozy, carried a softness that somehow stung. I just nodded and said, "It's home." She smiled politely, and in that moment, I realized something painful. This house, the home that held every memory of my husband, every laugh of my son, might never mean the same to her as it did to us. That night, as the candles flickered and the small talk continued, I began to feel something inside me shift. Not jealousy, not anger. Just a quiet, aching realization that my son was stepping into a new life, and I was watching from the edge of it. But I had no idea how true that feeling would become, because before the night ended, I would see and hear something that changed everything I thought I knew about Lena and about the woman my son was about to marry. After that dinner, I thought I could breathe again. Daniel seemed happy, and Lena had been perfectly polite. I told myself I was being silly, that my unease was nothing more than a mother's nerves. But sometimes your heart whispers things your mind doesn't want to hear. The next few weeks were quiet. Daniel called me less often. When he did, he spoke with that distracted tone people get when they're in love, half listening, half dreaming. I would ask, "Are you eating well?" And he'd answer, "Yes, Mom, Lena makes great pasta." He'd tell me about their plans, the concerts, the movie nights, the weekends away. I smiled and said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart." But after the call ended, I would sit in silence, staring at the phone. The house seemed to grow quieter with every passing day. I tried not to be selfish. I reminded myself that every parent goes through this, the letting go, the loneliness. Still, I missed him. I missed the way he used to burst into the kitchen just to tell me about his day. I missed hearing his footsteps on the stairs. One Saturday morning, I decided to visit him. Not to intrude, just to drop off a pie I had baked. He had mentioned that Lena loved apple pie, and I thought maybe, just maybe, it would be a small way to connect. When I arrived, I knocked on the door, pie in hand. Daniel opened it, surprised, but happy. "Mom, you didn't tell me you were coming." I smiled. "I know. I just wanted to see you." Lena came into the hallway, her smile polite, but tight. "Oh, Mrs. Andrews, how nice to see you." She looked beautiful, as always, perfectly put together even in jeans and a sweater. But I noticed how her eyes flicked toward Daniel, as if silently asking, "Did you know she was coming?" I told them I wouldn't stay long. I just wanted to bring them the pie and say hello. Daniel insisted I come in for coffee, and Lena, though clearly hesitant, agreed. Inside, their apartment was lovely, modern, bright, full of things I didn't recognize. It looked nothing like our old house. There were sleek glass tables, abstract paintings, and not a single family photo in sight. Even Daniel's childhood picture, the one he used to keep on his desk, was gone. Lena made coffee while Daniel showed me around. He seemed proud, eager to share this new chapter of his life, but I noticed how he kept glancing toward the kitchen, almost nervously, like he wanted me to like her, to approve. That broke my heart a little. When Lena came back with the coffee, she set the cups down gently. "Your son has been telling me all about the house he grew up in. He said it's old-fashioned, but cozy." There was that word again, cozy. I smiled. "It's been our home for 30 years. She nodded, then added, "We've been thinking about buying a house soon, maybe something a bit more modern. You'll have to give me decorating tips." Her tone was sweet, but something in it felt sharp, like she was drawing a line between Daniel's old life and their new one. Daniel laughed nervously. "Mom's the best decorator I know. She made everything beautiful with so little." She smiled, but I saw it. That fleeting expression that said, "We live differently now." I didn't stay long. I hugged them both, told them I was happy, and walked home with the empty pie dish. But my heart felt heavy. Not from jealousy, but from a quiet sadness. I had spent years teaching Daniel to be strong, independent, loving, and now that he was, I didn't know where I fit anymore. A few weeks later, Daniel called again. He sounded excited. "Mom, Lena and I have been talking. We'd like you to come over for dinner. She wants to cook for you this time." I hesitated for a moment, but then said yes. Maybe it was a chance to know her better, woman to woman, not just mother and fiancée. I told myself that love sometimes takes time to understand. That Friday, I dressed carefully, not fancy, just simple. A soft blue sweater, my pearl earrings, and the little silver bracelet Daniel gave me on my 50th birthday. When I arrived, she greeted me warmly. "You look lovely, Mrs. Andrews." I smiled. "Thank you, dear." The dinner was elegant. Candlelight, wine glasses, everything arranged perfectly. She had cooked salmon with lemon butter and roasted vegetables. It smelled wonderful. For a while, it almost felt normal. 3 people sharing stories and laughter. But then, as we talked, something happened. It wasn't one big moment, just little things that began to feel off. Every time Daniel spoke about something from his childhood, Lena interrupted to clarify or correct him. When I told a funny story about how he used to hide cookies under his bed, she laughed, but there was a glint in her eyes, the kind that said, "You're embarrassing him." He didn't notice. He was too busy making sure I was comfortable. But I noticed. I noticed everything. When I complimented her on the food, she smiled and said, "Oh, thank you. Daniel helped a little, though he tried to use your old recipe at first, and I told him we should make it healthier." I laughed softly. I see he's learning new tricks. But inside, I felt something twist. It was such a small comment, but it carried a message that my ways were outdated, unnecessary now. After dessert, Daniel excused himself to take a work call. Lena started clearing the table, and I offered to help. "Oh, no," she said quickly. "You're our guest." Her tone was kind, but her eyes said, "Please don't touch anything." So I sat quietly, sipping the last of my tea. And in that silence, I realized something important. This wasn't about disliking me. It was about control. She wanted everything, even the smallest details, to happen her way. After that night, things changed. Daniel stopped calling as often. Whenever I did hear from him, he was always busy. He still sounded kind, still said he loved me, but there was a distance now, a soft wall between us that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, I called him just to say hello. Lena answered his phone. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Andrews," she said cheerfully. "Daniel's taking a nap. Long week." I smiled, though something about her voice made me uneasy. "That's all right, dear. I just wanted to check in." She paused. "You know, Daniel's been working so hard. You shouldn't worry so much. He's in good hands." Her words were gentle, but they stayed with me. He's in good hands. Why did that sound like she was reassuring herself more than me? Weeks turned into months. I tried to keep my distance, not wanting to intrude, but then came the phone call. The one that would change everything. "Mom," Daniel said one evening, "we're engaged." My heart skipped. "Oh, Daniel, congratulations!" He laughed, and I could hear the happiness in his voice. "I knew you'd be happy. We're planning a small dinner soon, just you, me, and Lena. We want you to be the first to celebrate with us." My throat tightened. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love that." But when I hung up the phone, my hands were trembling. I didn't know why. Maybe it was joy, maybe fear, maybe both. The day of the dinner, I cleaned the kitchen twice. I wanted everything to be perfect again, like the first time she came. I cooked my best dishes, set the table with care, and even placed fresh flowers in the vase. But somewhere inside, I felt restless, as if I knew something was waiting for me that night. When they arrived, Lena looked radiant. She hugged me, her perfume soft and elegant. "Mrs. Andrews, you really didn't have to go through all this trouble." I smiled. "It's no trouble at all." Dinner went well at first. Laughter, stories, a toast to their future. But as the evening went on, I began to notice the same strange energy again. Lena seemed distracted, checking her phone under the cable, whispering to Daniel now and then. When I asked about the wedding date, she smiled and said, "Oh, we haven't decided yet. It depends on a few things." Her tone was vague, her eyes avoiding mine. Something felt off. I couldn't name it, but it was there. In the small pauses, the way she touched Daniel's hand when he spoke, as if to remind him to say the right thing. Later, when Daniel went to take a call in the other room, Lena leaned back in her chair. She looked around my kitchen, at the old wooden cabinets, the faded tiles, the small family photos. She smiled faintly and said, almost to herself, "It's sweet how some people hold on to the past." I didn't answer, because in that moment, I realized what I needed to do. That night, I decided to learn who Lena really was. Not from what Daniel told me, not from what she showed me, but from what she said when she thought I wasn't listening. So at their next dinner, the one they didn't know would become unforgettable, I planned to step quietly into the kitchen and listen. Not to spy, not to hurt, but to understand. I still remember the first time I held Daniel. He was so tiny, wrapped in a blue blanket that looked far too big for his little body. He had his father's eyes, calm, brown, and full of wonder. I remember whispering, "You're my whole world now." And for the next 30 years, that's exactly what he became. We lived in a modest house on a quiet street. It wasn't much, but every corner had a memory. The living room was where Daniel learned to take his first steps. The kitchen was where we laughed, spilled soup, and burned our first cake together. And the porch. That's where we used to sit in the evenings, watching the sun melt into the horizon. Back then, it felt like life was simple. We didn't have much money, but we had love. And somehow, that was enough. After his father passed away, everything changed. Daniel was only 12. I remember sitting by his bed at night, watching him pretend to sleep, and wondering if I was strong enough for both of us. I had lost my partner, but Daniel had lost his hero. From that day on, I promised myself I would be both, his mother and his father. I went back to work, cooked his favorite meals, and tried to smile even when my heart was breaking. Every time he brought home a good braid, he'd run to me and say, "Dad would have been proud, right?" And I'd nod, holding back tears, whispering, "He is, sweetheart. He always is." Years passed. Daniel grew into a kind, responsible man, the kind of man every mother dreams of raising. He worked hard, saved money, helped me with groceries, and never forgot to call me Mom in that soft tone that melted me every time. We weren't rich, but we had peace. He'd come home from work, and we'd sit together over dinner, talking about his day. I'd listen, smiling, pretending I wasn't worried about him feeling lonely. And then, one day, he mentioned her name. It was so casual at first, like a breeze that slipped through an open window. "Mom, there's someone I want you to meet one day." I remember laughing softly. "Is she special?" I asked. He blushed, just like when he was a teenager. "She's different," he said, smiling to himself. "Her name's Lena. She works with me. She's funny, kind, and I don't know, she just makes everything easier." That was the first time I heard her name. Lena. It sounded elegant, confident, like someone who knew exactly who she was. Over the next few weeks, Daniel talked about her often. He told me how she'd make him coffee at work when he forgot breakfast, how she'd tease him when he got too serious, and how she once stayed late just to help him finish a project. I could tell he was falling for her. And though my heart warmed for him, a small ache began to grow quietly inside me. It's a strange thing, the love of a mother. You raise your child, teach him to walk, to talk, to dream, and then one day, someone else becomes his center. You're still part of his life, but no longer the heart of it. Daniel started spending more evenings out. He'd text me to say he'd be home late, or that he was having dinner with friends. I never asked too many questions. I didn't want to sound possessive. But deep down, I missed him. The house began to feel empty again, like it did after his father passed. When he finally brought Lena home, I was nervous, more than I wanted to admit. I spent 2 days cleaning, cooking, even polishing the old teapot that hadn't been used in years. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted her to feel welcome, and maybe I wanted her to like me. When they arrived, Lena's smile lit up the doorway. She was beautiful, not in a flashy way, but in a quiet, graceful way. Her hair was neat, her dress simple but elegant. She hugged me politely, and her perfume filled the room with the scent of white lilies. I could see why Daniel adored her. We sat in the living room, and I served tea. Daniel held her hand, his thumb gently rubbing her fingers, a small gesture that said more than words ever could. They laughed easily together. Lena spoke about her job, her family, her travels. I listened, nodding, smiling when appropriate. but part of me felt invisible. At one point, Daniel excused himself to take a phone call. That's when Lena looked around and said softly, "You have a lovely home, Mrs. Andrews. It's very cozy." There was a slight hesitation before the word cozy, like she was searching for something polite to say about a place that didn't quite fit her world. I smiled. "Thank you, dear. It's not much, but it's full of memories." She nodded, her eyes scanning the old furniture, the fading curtains, the photographs on the walls. I could tell she came from a different world, a newer, shinier one. Still, I tried my best. I offered more tea, asked about her parents, and listened as she spoke about her childhood in the city. She seemed kind, but distant, like someone standing near the window, always ready to leave. That night, after they left, I sat alone at the dining table. The plates were still warm, the chairs still pulled back, and for the first time, I realized that my son's world was expanding, and I wasn't sure there would be space for me in it. Days turned into weeks. Daniel visited less often. Sometimes he'd drop by for lunch, other times just to grab a few things. He'd talk about Lena, her new promotion, their plans, their future. And while I smiled and nodded, inside, I was bracing myself for the moment he'd say it. And one evening, he did. "Mom, I want to marry her." I froze. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I smiled, because that's what mothers do even when their hearts ache. I said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. She's a lovely girl." He hugged me, thanking me for being supportive. And as I held him, I realized my son was no longer mine alone. After Daniel told me he wanted to marry Lena, I felt two emotions at once: pride and fear. Pride because I had raised a man capable of loving so deeply. Fear because I knew what came next, the slow fading of my place in his life. But I told myself this is how life goes. Children grow, they fall in love, they build new homes, new families, and mothers, they learn to stand quietly in the background, smiling from the shadows. Still, something about Lena made me uneasy. It wasn't anything she said directly. It was in the small things, the way she'd glance at Daniel when I spoke, as if checking whether he agreed with me. The polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. The way she'd call me Mrs. Andrews, even after I told her gently, "Please, call me Helen." She always replied with a soft laugh, "Oh, I could never. You deserve respect." But respect without warmth is just distance wearing perfume. In the weeks that followed, Daniel spent more and more time at Lena's apartment. He'd come by only on weekends, sometimes just for a few hours. I tried not to let it show, but every time I heard his car pull away, the silence and the house grew heavier. I filled my days with small things, gardening, baking, rearranging the same furniture again and again. Sometimes I'd make too much food just so I could send him home with leftovers. It was my way of staying close. Food has always been a mother's last language of love. But then small things began to happen, moments that left tiny bruises on my heart. One Sunday, Daniel brought Lena over for lunch. I had made her favorite, roasted chicken with honey glaze. She smiled when she saw it, but as we sat down, she picked at her food, barely eating. Daniel noticed. "Everything okay, babe?" he asked softly. "Oh, yes, it's just, A little too sweet for me. I felt the words like a quiet sting. I smiled, though. That's all right, dear. Maybe next time I'll make something more to your taste. But her next words hurt more than she could have known. Oh, don't worry. Once Daniel and I move in together, I'll be cooking for him all the time. She said it with a laugh, light, teasing, but I saw the quick glance she gave me after. It wasn't cruel. It was careless. The kind of carelessness that forgets a mother's heart still beats at the same table. Daniel laughed, reaching for her hand. She's a great cook, Mom. You'll love her lasagna. I smiled and nodded, my throat too tight to speak. After they left, I sat alone again. The half-eaten chicken still on the table. The house smelled of sweetness and emptiness. The next time I saw Lena was 2 weeks later. Daniel brought her over to help with some house repairs. They were painting the living room. I stood by the doorway, watching them laugh as they teased each other with the paintbrushes. For a moment, I felt something soft. Happiness, maybe. Then I heard Lena say, Daniel, you really need to update this place. It's like stepping back in time. He laughed. Yeah, Mom's old-fashioned. They didn't mean harm. They were young. But those words settled deep inside me. A quiet reminder that the world was moving on and I was standing still. Later that day, while Daniel was fixing something outside, Lena joined me in the kitchen. I offered her tea, and for the first time, she accepted. As I poured it, she said softly, You must be so proud of Daniel. Oh, yes, I smiled. He's always been a good boy. She stirred her tea slowly, then looked up at me with a small, polite smile. Sometimes I think he relies on you too much. It's sweet, but he's grown now. He needs space. I froze a second, then forced a gentle nod. You're right, he does. But when she left the room, I felt something tighten in my chest. That's what she wanted. Space between me and the boy I had raised alone for 3 decades. Over the next few months, the changes became clear. Daniel stopped calling every night. Sometimes he'd text instead. Sometimes he'd forget. When he finally did call, it was short. He'd say, Sorry, Mom, Lena and I were busy. Busy became the new normal. One evening, I asked if they'd come over for dinner. He hesitated. Mom, we're a little tight on time these days. Maybe next week. That maybe lingered for weeks. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who clings. So I stopped asking. I told myself I'd wait for him to come when he wanted to. But waiting has a way of breaking you quietly. You start measuring love in hours between phone calls. A few months later, Daniel finally called. Mom, Lena's parents are in town. I want you to meet them. My heart jumped. Finally, a chance to see where I fit in their new life. I asked when. Next Saturday, dinner at their place. Just keep it casual, okay? Casual? I spent all week preparing. I bought a new dress, something simple, soft blue, the color Daniel said suited me best. I even baked a cake to bring, though I wasn't sure if it was appropriate. That evening, as I got ready, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. There were more lines, more silver in my hair. I wasn't the young mother anymore, just a woman trying not to be forgotten. When we arrived, Lena's parents greeted me kindly. They were polite, well-dressed, elegant, the kind of people who seemed perfectly put together. Her mother complimented my dress. Her father asked about my work, my late husband. Everything was civil, but it felt like I was being quietly measured. During dinner, I tried to join in the conversation, But most of it was about travel, investments, new restaurants, things far beyond my simple world. At one point, Lena's mother said, "You raised a wonderful son, Mrs. Andrews. He'll fit in beautifully with our family." Her smile was kind, but her tone carried something else. Ownership, maybe. I nodded, pretending not to feel the shift. They weren't unkind people, but I could sense how different their world was from mine. And in that difference, I felt something heavy, a quiet certainty that I was becoming a guest in my own son's life. Weeks passed again. The wedding plans began, and though Daniel included me, I noticed the details were mostly decided by Lena and her mother. I didn't mind. I told myself it was tradition. Still, each time I offered a suggestion, it was brushed aside politely. "Oh, that's sweet, Mrs. Andrews, but we've already booked something else." Always with a smile, always gentle, always distant. One evening, after a long day of wedding preparations, I overheard Daniel talking to Lena on the phone. His voice was soft. "I know she means well, babe. She's just old-fashioned. Please, try to understand." Old-fashioned. The word hit me harder than it should have. I wasn't angry, just quietly tired. Tired of being tolerated instead of loved. And then came that dinner, the one I'll never forget. The night I invited Lena and her parents over to my house. I wanted to do something kind, to show them that I wasn't just the mother, that I could welcome them with warmth and grace. I cooked all day. The table was perfect. Candles, fresh flowers, every dish made with love. When they arrived, everyone smiled politely. But as the evening went on, something felt off. The conversations were light, almost forced. Lena's parents complimented the meal, but their tone felt rehearsed. Daniel tried to keep everyone laughing, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes. At one point, while I was in the kitchen checking the dessert, I heard voices from the dining room. Soft, but clear. Lena's mother whispered, "She's sweet, but this place is so small. Daniel's used to better now." Lena laughed quietly, replying, "I know, but she means well. We'll help her once we're married." And then I heard Daniel's voice, low, hesitant. "Please, Mom loves this house. Let's just leave it be, okay?" There was a pause. Then Lena said, softly but firmly, "You can't hold on to everything from your past, Daniel." Something inside me broke a little that night. Not from what they said, but from how easily they said it. Like my life, my memories, my love for this home were just clutter to be cleared away. I stood there, in the kitchen doorway, the dessert spoon still in my hand, my heart sinking slowly, like a candle burning out. That was the night everything began to change. The night I realized love can still hurt, even when no one means to. That night stayed with me, not because of what they said, but because of how easily they said it. I spent hours replaying their voices in my head, their soft laughter, their quiet judgments. Every word carved a tiny crack inside my heart. But I didn't confront anyone. I just smiled, served dessert, and pretended not to notice the distance growing around me. Daniel helped me clean up after they left. He looked tired, not just from the evening, but from something deeper. When I asked him if everything was all right, he smiled and said, "Yeah, Mom, just a lot on my mind." Then he hugged me, longer than usual. It was one of those hugs that said what words couldn't. And for a brief moment, I felt safe again. Like, no matter what changed, that small part of him, the part that loved me, would always remain. But love changes, even when we don't see it happening. The following week, Daniel called. His voice was hesitant. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, already sensing what was coming. When he arrived, he looked nervous, the way people do when they're about to say something that might hurt you. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, his hands clasped together. "Lena and I were thinking," he began, "maybe you should move closer to Aunt Clara. She's alone too, and it might be nice to have company." For a moment, I didn't breathe. "You mean move out of the house?" I asked quietly. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Just for a while. The place is getting old, and you've always said you wanted to be near family. Lena and I could help with the packing," and I didn't let him finish. "Oh, Daniel," I whispered, forcing a smile. "You don't need to worry about me. I'm fine here." He looked torn. "Mom, it's not about worry. It's about space. Lena feels like..." And there it was, the word again, space. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had held him through fever, heartbreak, and every scraped knee. The same hands that had built this home, one small sacrifice at a time. "Lena feels what, Daniel?" I asked gently. He sighed. "She feels like you deserve your own life now, and she wants us to start ours." I wanted to tell him that my life was him, that this house wasn't just walls and wood. It was memories. It was the sound of his laughter echoing down the hallway. It was the smell of his childhood. But I didn't say that. Instead, I smiled. "If that's what makes you both happy, then I'll think about it." He looked relieved, and that relief hurt more than anything because it meant he wanted me to say yes. When he left that night, I stood by the window, watching his car fade into the distance. The porch light flickered softly, and for the first time in years, I felt completely alone. Days turned into weeks. I didn't pack. I didn't call Aunt Clara. I just waited. Waited for Daniel to call again, to visit, to say that maybe Lena had changed her mind. But he didn't. Then, one rainy evening, my phone rang. It was Lena. Her voice was unusually soft. "Mrs. Andrews, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to ask if you'd be home this weekend. Daniel and I wanted to stop by, just for dinner." For a moment, my heart lifted. "Of course," I said. "I'll make something special." "Thank you," she said quickly. "Oh, and if it's all right, my parents might join us too." I hesitated, but agreed. "Of course, dear. The more the merrier." When the call ended, I sat there in silence. Something felt strange. Her tone wasn't warm. It was measured. Like this dinner wasn't about food. It was about something else. That Saturday, I woke up early and began cooking. The rain had stopped, but the air outside was still heavy. I made all of Daniel's favorites, the stew, the honey rolls, and his father's old recipe for lemon pie. I wanted the night to feel like home again. By 6 o'clock, everything was ready. I lit candles, set the table, and looked around. For a moment, it almost felt like the old days, before the distance, before the hesitation. Then I heard the doorbell. Their laughter drifted in before I even reached the door. Daniel looked handsome in his dark suit. Lena stood beside him, perfect, as always. Her parents followed, carrying small gifts and polite smiles. "Everything smells wonderful," Lena's mother said, stepping inside. "Thank you," I replied softly. "Please, make yourselves comfortable."
We all sat down to eat. The conversations began light, wedding plans, Daniel's work, small talk. But beneath it all, I felt something brewing. A tension, so quiet you could almost miss it, like a storm forming behind calm clouds. Halfway through dinner, Lena's father cleared his throat. "Mrs. Andrews, there's something we wanted to discuss," he began. Daniel looked down. Lena reached for his hand. My heart started to pound. He continued, "You've been so wonderful, and we're grateful for all your love and care. But as Daniel and Lena start their new life together, we were thinking." Lena's mother finished the sentence for him, her voice soft and practiced. "It might be best if Daniel took over the house. We'd help with renovations, of course, and you could move somewhere smaller, cozier."
I froze. It felt like the air had been pulled out of the room. Daniel tried to speak. "Mom, I raised a hand, gently stopping him. "So that's what this dinner is about?" I asked quietly. Lena leaned forward. "Please don't misunderstand. We just want to make things easier for everyone." Easier. That word burned in my chest. I smiled, though my voice trembled. "I see. You want to make me easier to move." Her face softened with guilt. No, that's not what I meant." I stood up slowly, trying to steady my breath. "I understand," I said softly. "It's not the house you want. It's the past you want to erase." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please." I looked at him, my voice calm but heavy. "You can have the house, Daniel, every brick of it, but don't forget who built it for you." He tried to speak again, but I just smiled. The kind of smile that hides pain so deep, only mothers know how to wear it. "I start packing tomorrow," I whispered. Then I turned and walked into the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had stood, years ago, listening behind the door. From the kitchen, I could hear them talking softly, Lena's mother saying, "We didn't mean to upset her." Daniel replying, "She'll be okay. She's strong." Strong. People always say that about women who break quietly. But strength isn't silence. It's what you choose to do after the silence ends. That night, after they left, I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty chairs. The candlelight flickered and tears rolled down my cheeks. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad in the usual way. I was hollow. I walked through the house, touching the walls, the old photographs, the little notes Daniel used to leave on the fridge. Each memory whispered a goodbye. By the time I reached his old room, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I sat on his bed and cried. Not because I was losing my home, but because I was realizing something painful. You can love someone so much that you forget how to love yourself. The next morning, I made coffee, opened the window, and watched the sunrise. The world was quiet, but for the first time in years, I felt clarity. I decided I wouldn't leave out of pity. I would leave out of peace. Because sometimes letting go is not a sign of weakness. It's how you teach others what love really means. That night was the turning point. Not the end of my story, but the beginning of a new one. One where love no longer meant losing myself. After that first dinner, something inside me began to change. Not all at once. Not like a storm. It was quieter, like slow rain seeping through old wood. Lena started visiting more often. At first she was polite, always with a soft smile, always offering to help. But over time I began to feel something different. A space. A small, invisible wall between us. It wasn't anything she said directly. It was how she looked at me when I gave Daniel advice. How she changed the subject when I mentioned traditions, the ones that I had carried for years. It was in the way she touched his arm when he spoke, as if to remind him she was there now, that she belonged in his world more than I did. Sometimes I'd walk past Daniel's room and hear their laughter behind the door. I'd stop for a moment, my hand resting on the wall, and listen. Then I'd walk away quietly. A mother learns to make herself small, to not interrupt, to not disturb happiness even if she's no longer part of it. One afternoon, Lena came by while Daniel was still at work. I remember it clearly, the sunlight falling through the kitchen window, the smell of soup simmering on the stove. She sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, her polished nails tapping against the screen. I asked her gently, "Would you like some tea, dear?" She didn't look up. "No, thank you. I don't really drink tea." I smiled, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, that's fine. Daniel still loves it. I make it the same way I did when he was little." She chuckled, a soft, almost careless sound. "I'm trying to get him to stop drinking so much of it. It's not really healthy." That word "stop" stuck with me. Not because of what she said, but how easily she said it. As if she already had the right to decide what was good or bad for my son. I didn't argue. I just nodded, stirring the soup slowly, pretending not to feel the ache in my chest. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing little things. Daniel didn't come home as often. He forgot to call some nights. And when he did, his voice sounded distant, like he was somewhere far beyond the reach of my love. Once I asked him, "You've been busy lately, haven't you, sweetheart?" He smiled through the phone. "Yeah, Mom, just work and, life." It's such a small word, but it carries so much weight when it starts to move without you. Then came the evening that still feels heavy in my memory. I was setting the table for Sunday dinner, our little tradition. Daniel had promised he'd bring Lena. I even baked her favorite lemon pie. But when they arrived, the air felt strange. They sat down, and for a while, everything seemed fine. Polite conversation, small smiles. Then Daniel said something that made me drop my fork. "Mom," he began carefully, "Lena and I are thinking about getting our own place." The room fell silent. I looked at him, my heart beating faster. "Already? But you just got engaged." He hesitated. "Yeah, I know, but Lena feels like she needs space, a fresh start." I looked at her. She smiled politely, but didn't meet my eyes. I wanted to speak, to say this house is his home, my home, our memories. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "That's wonderful, dear. You should do what makes you happy." But inside, I could feel something breaking. That night, after they left, I sat in Daniel's old room. His posters still on the wall, the little toy car he loved as a boy still on the shelf. I held it in my hands, remembering the day he ran through the garden, laughing, shouting, "Watch me, Mom!" And I thought, when did he stop asking me to watch him? Days turned into weeks. The house grew quieter. Even the ticking of the clock sounded louder now, as if it too missed his footsteps. Then one day, Lena called. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Mrs. Andrews, I wanted to ask something. Would you mind if Daniel and I hosted dinner at our new place next weekend?" I froze. For years, every Sunday dinner had been in this house, the house Daniel grew up in. Now she wanted to move it. I took a slow breath and said, "Of course, dear. That sounds lovely." But inside, I could feel something breaking. That night, after they left, I sat alone at my table, staring at the 2 empty plates across from me. I whispered, "It used to be us." When the next weekend came, I decided to go. I wore my favorite blue dress, the one Daniel said made me look soft like the sky. I brought a basket of bread, still warm from the oven. Their apartment was beautiful, bright, modern, filled with color, but it didn't smell like home. It smelled like candles and new paint, not love and memory. Lena welcomed me with a smile. "Please make yourself comfortable." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes, cold. All through dinner, I noticed how she spoke for Daniel. When I asked him about work, she answered. When I asked if he was eating well, she said, "I make sure of it." And Daniel, my sweet boy, just smiled and nodded. It wasn't until dessert that I realized something painful. He wasn't just hers now, he was becoming her. When I came home that night, the silence felt heavier than ever. I sat by the window, staring out at the dark, and whispered, "Maybe this is how mothers lose their sons. Not in one moment, but little by little." The days that followed were slower than I can describe. Each morning felt like walking through mist, familiar shapes, but nothing truly clear. The house had always been quiet since Daniel grew up, but now it felt empty. Still, I kept my routines. I cooked breakfast for 1. I swept the porch every evening. I made tea and drank it alone by the window, watching the same street he used to ride his bike down. Sometimes I caught myself setting out 2 plates by habit. Then I'd stop, smile softly, and put 1 back in the cupboard. It's strange how love lingers in the smallest things, in the way a chair creaks, in the scent of coffee that still feels shared. Weeks passed before I saw Daniel again. When he finally came by, he looked different, thinner, quieter. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mom," he said, sitting down at the table, "I've missed your cooking." Those words alone were enough to make me tear up. I laughed softly, wiping my eyes with the corner of my apron. "Oh, sweetheart, you always had a way of saying just the right thing." As we ate, we talked about small things, the weather, work, my garden. I didn't ask about Lena, and he didn't bring her up. But near the end of the meal, his fork paused mid-air. He looked at me, eyes uncertain, and said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." My heart tightened. "What is it, dear?" He took a slow breath. "Lena and I have decided to take a break. She said she's not ready for marriage yet." I nodded quietly. I didn't say I'd seen it coming. I didn't say I'd heard the way she spoke that night behind the door. I just reached over and placed my hand over his. "I'm sorry, Daniel," I whispered. "That must hurt." He nodded, his lips pressed tightly together. But then, almost in a whisper, he added, "She said I'm too close to you, that I'll never be able to make my own life while you're still around." He looked at me then, not angry, just lost. I smiled gently, brushing his hair back like I used to when he was a child. I said, "If you choose to be with Lena, it's up to you. You must make your own decisions." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice so small it broke me, "I don't ever want to lose you, Mom." I smiled, brushing his hair back like I used to when he was a child. I said, "You won't. You'll just learn to love me differently." After he left that night, I didn't cry. For the first time in a long while, my heart felt light, not because everything was perfect, but because I finally understood something. We spend so much of our lives trying to hold people close, when sometimes the most loving thing we can do is give them space to breathe. A few months later, Lita came to see me. It was unexpected. A knock on the door one quiet Sunday morning. When I opened it, She stood there, holding a small plant in her hands. "Mrs. Andrews," she said softly, "I wanted to say I'm sorry." Her voice trembled. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. Daniel's a good man, and I see now how much of that comes from you." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I smiled, not out of pride, but peace. "Thank you, dear. That means more than you know." I took the plant from her hands. It was a small white lily. "Beautiful," I said. "You know, lilies stand for renewal." She smiled faintly. "That's why I brought it." We talked for a while. Nothing heavy, nothing bitter. Just two women learning to understand each other. Maybe a little too late, but still in time for kindness. When she left, I placed the lily on the kitchen windowsill, right where the sun could touch it. It bloomed quietly for months after that. Daniel visits often now. He brings groceries, helps with the garden, tells me about his new projects. We laugh more. We sit in comfortable silence sometimes. No tension, no unspoken hurt. One evening, as we were watching the sunset from the porch, he said, "You know, Mom, I used to think you were the strongest person I knew." I smiled, looking at the fading sky. "And now?" He chuckled. "Now I know it." That night, I went to bed feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from getting what you want, but the kind that comes when you finally stop holding on so tightly. Before I closed my eyes, I whispered a little prayer. Not for things to stay the same, but for all of us. Me, Daniel, and even Lena. To find happiness in our own ways. Because love doesn't end when people drift apart. It just changes shape. It becomes quieter, wiser, softer. And so, if anyone ever asks me what motherhood feels like after the children leave, I'll tell them this. It feels like standing at the doorway on a cool evening, watching your child walk away, and instead of calling them back, you whisper, "Go on, my love. The world is waiting for you." And maybe, just maybe, that's when they finally find their way home again